Hari Om. Thank you, and very, very good to be back. The 14th day, I was here at the inaugural and could see the excitement then. I see a bit of tiredness, and that is understandable. Must have been a fairly rigorous and fairly tough last fortnight. Uh, Beyond the individual exertion, the last fortnight is actually a watershed in the idea of IKS and how do we advance that and how do we build a system around it. If you think about the conversation that we had on the first day, there were a few proposals that we made. I had sort of exhorted that it needs a partnership between five important stakeholders: the political leadership, who give us the executive commitment and the policy direction. We spoke about the importance of academic leadership, the ability to imagine a transformative change and build relationships across the spectrum. Focus on building the faculty competencies, thinking about the curriculum, the learning resources, the textbooks, the pedagogical challenges that we need to overcome. And we were, in fact, pointed to in the same direction in this morning's session as well. What do we mean by IKS? How do we consolidate it? How do you systematize that? So there are a lot of challenges, and I think we've covered the landscape in the last 14 days. And this serves as an inspiration for us to think about our work in our own respective departments back when we are at our universities. We also spoke about three other stakeholders who are critical in this. We said the industry has to be bought into this. We have to make a case for why any capital, human capital coming out of Indian knowledge systems is significantly better equipped to deal with a complex world. We said that NEP has a vision of complexity thinking, and IKS is the best means to advance our own journey in dealing with complexity. And then the fourth stakeholder we spoke about are the parents who actually take decisions about what courses their kids should enroll in. And that has to be a very active engagement to persuade. There is a lot of leadership, there is a lot of enterprise involved in that persuasion. And last and most critically, I pointed out to the significance of the learner at the center of all of this. We said that unless we are able to give a moral reason, an intellectually gratifying answer to why a young person who is just about to make a decision about her life should choose IKS over everything else. Unless we are able to answer that in our own conviction, unless we are able to do that, being empathetic to the kind of complexity and the kind of confusion that young person starting out in her life has, we will not advance IKS beyond classrooms or beyond academic conversations. It has to be a public movement. It has to be an intellectually strong response, and more importantly, it has to be a call that answers the moral imagination that young people have. So we have a lot of context around this. And in the first session this morning, when we spoke about the definition of IKS, there is, to my understanding, a working definition of IKS, which at least I have seen in the works of Kapil Kapoorji, Nagaraj Pathuriji, and Hari Kiranji, and others have also espoused it, that it is the cultural memeplex that ties the Vedic, the Buddhist, the Jaina, the folk, and the tribal knowledge systems that have come from this knowledge or from this land. And they all share the same sacred cosmology of Dharma. So there is definitely a lot of material for us to work out more specifics. But we also have to understand what is the strategic context of IKS. What is, if you are to answer, like I said, if you have to ask a young person why he or she is not choosing IKS today, and if we have to, for a minute, inhabit their world, their mind, become the voice in their head, we have to understand that there are 4 or 5 meta trends that all of us, whether we recognize it or not, we are grappling with, sometimes consciously and many times unconsciously. Right? There is at the center of it a global meaning crisis. And I hope to have a conversation with Shekharji and Hariji about it. I know both of them personally, and we've had these conversations many a times in the past, and I'm really hoping to bring that out. About the challenge of meaning making itself. Then there is the crisis also of understanding what is required to deal with complexity. How do you actually make sense of a world where your ecology, your economy, your environment, everything seems to be colluding into each other, and what it does to the human mind? In many ways, it actually translates into a colonization of time and colonization of senses. We do not have our own ideas of time. We do not have our own ideas of development. We do not have our own moral imagination for what a globalized future looks like. So when we look at a roadmap for Indian knowledge systems, and when we are talking about a transformation, a revolution of IKS, we are talking not about what we need to do within the Indian academia alone. We are talking about what the Indian academia, Indian society, Indian philosophical constructs can do for a global future. So that is the strategic context as I think about the possibilities and the pedagogical and methodological interventions that we need to make. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me two of the most profound thinkers, not just because they care deeply for the human development and learning, but also because they combine that with enterprise and rigor and truly understand the power of collaboration. Whatever I do as part of Bruhat is also inspired by what I've learned from people like Harikiran Garu and Shekharji, who built institutions and who created an ecosystem for many, many people to come together. So this conversation is going to be about the possibilities and challenges and a little bit about the learning culture and the environment, the macro environment and systems that need to come together for any kind of learning to happen. So I welcome Sheshadriji and welcome Harikiran Garu. Very, very delighted to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raghava. Thank you very much.
And you have faculties from many universities sitting here and many more watching online. And all of them are very keen to get some perspective. And I would engage with them as well. This is not just a one-way conversation. We would have time to actually take questions, suggestions, and thoughts from the group themselves. And I will relay that to you. I'll begin with Shekharji. So the structure that we have for the next hour or so is I will invite Shekharji and Harikiranji to give some opening remarks about the landscape. Then we will talk about some key propositions. What are the big ideas? What are the possibilities around those ideas? And what needs to happen? What needs to be done more of? And what should be avoided for this to be a success? And lastly, maybe we will end with a call to action of how all of us can become co-creators in this journey. Shekharji, over to you for some initial comments. The idea, of course, is a landscape survey of IKS possibilities and challenges, and then we'll get into methodology and pedagogy.
Thank you very much, Raghav, and good morning, friends. I'm delighted to share the platform with Hariji and with Raghav, and thank you, Richa, for this kind invitation. I'm taking four strands from the opening remarks that Raghav has made to share some of my preliminary thoughts on which I will predicate the rest of what I wish to share as the session proceeds. Transformation, complexity, meaning-making, and the subjective world of learners. Now let's take these four strands and then examine IKS in the context of two realities that we have experienced in the last 2 years. One is the pandemic and the other is NEP 2020. So let us look at the pandemic and NEP 2020 as two tracks on which these four, the framework that I have presented, I'd like to share with you. Now, I'm a medical doctor, a psychiatrist and a child psychiatrist, or I would like to say I'm a medical doctor by training, a psychiatrist by specialization, and a child psychiatrist by choice, because the adult world terrifies and scares me. I am quite okay with children. My own adulthood is a tremendous source of confusion and distress to me. Because children are natural born philosophers. They have the gift of curiosity and wonder, and that's what a philosopher is. For a child, even a discarded toffee wrapper is a plaything because it has texture, it has sound, and it takes flight when the child throws it up in the wind. So how full of wonder and awe and experimentation they are in the ilk of the true philosopher. That in psychology we believe that transformation in situations of predicament, in situations of distress, cannot occur when you try to simplify your reality into a cause-effect or a linear relationship. Transformation can only occur if you acknowledge the complexity and constellations of things involved in a particular predicament and situation. Now, this recognition of complexity, if you look at IKS on the one hand, and the way that systems of science and of experimentation have progressed over the last several years in academia, and you look at meaning making and the subjective world of learners, my submission to you, friends, is that the notion that knowledge arises from double-blind, placebo-controlled, crossover, randomized trials is poverty of epistemology, because it leaves out on the reality of the subjectivity and the lived experiences of people. And this richness of the lived experience of people, of learners, of the space that constitutes the academic space, the learning space that you and I and the learners are engaged in, need to be imbued with this idea of recognizing the importance of lived experience. And that knowledge, unfortunately, does not come from current conceptions of how science has progressed. This is not to belittle or trivialize science. But my point is, I do not think science has all the answers for all the human maladies and predicament and the state of the world. And it is important, therefore, particularly where I come from, if you look at transformation in people's lives, in the distress that they face, the trials and tribulations and challenges they encounter, in notions of the self, in relationships, in aspirations, in disappointments, that can only occur if you get into the narrative structure and become part of the emerging narrative of the person with whom you're engaged. And this process basically comes from a very robust history and a rich history that IKS is essentially constituted by. So, transformation, complexity, meaning making, and the subjective world of learners, this framework, as Raghav presented, is strongly embedded in the premise and the precepts that one borrows, essentially from IKS. So these are some opening thoughts that I wanted to share. I'm really keen to listen to Hariji as he takes it to his realm with the kind of scholarship and depth of engagement in Indica. So Raghav, over to you.
Thank you. As always, the sheer brilliance of Shekharji to pick just words and translate them into ideas and a framework. I think the framework came from you, sir, and I would come back to you on how we can think about this this fourfold approach. Harigaru, opening remarks from you about the landscape of Indian knowledge systems, and of course speaking from experience both as an entrepreneur and a thinker. And then I'll go back to you in the second round.
శ్రీ గురుభ్యో నమః. ఎందరో మహానుభావులు అందరికీ నా వందనం. ప్రొఫెసర్ జాయ్స్ సేన్, రీచా చోప్రా, గంటిమూర్తి గారు, అనురాధ చౌదరి, and my own dear friend and తమ్ముడు రాఘవ్ కృష్ణ, మీ అందరికీ నా హృదయపూర్వక కృతజ్ఞతలు. Thank you very, very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I have a few points, specifically the 4 points that you have responded, and I'm just thinking and articulating. But before that, I want to say that this is the fourth FTP program India has seen on Indian knowledge systems. Now, Richa will jump at me and say, no, this is the third one. Where is the fourth one? How are you saying it's the fourth one? I want to tell you that Professor Kapil Kapoor and Michel Danino have created the foundation for Indian knowledge traditions for CBSE way back in a previous dispensation before 2014. This was languishing. And Indica and Chinmaya Vishwavidyapeeth in the year 2016 did the first ever FDP program targeted at the school principals and the faculty at Velinad in Kerala. So in the sequence of post-independence, this is the fourth such event. So I'm very, very happy to be a part of this event as a continuation of my involvement in this activity. We have talked about 4 aspects of transformation, of meaning, of subject making. And I wanted to respond to Seshadri ji and Raghav. We have to look at Indian knowledge system not as an objective knowledge. It is an objective knowledge that simultaneously transforms the subject. The very subject that is studying this object has to be transformed. And this is a very, very important aspect of IKS. IKS is not a dry subject. IKS, when you look at it as a whole, has to involve a subjective transformation. Otherwise, there is no point. So this is a very, very important aspect that we at Indica have realized and are focused on. We do not, so if you come to our website, we are not interested in engaging with anybody unless that person is a seeker. So first and foremost, my appeal to all the faculty members who are attending is to think of yourself as a seeker. You could be seeking your sense of identity. You could be seeking a sense of purpose. But first and foremost, frame yourself as a seeker. For only when you begin to seek will IKS help you. Till that time, IKS will remain a very, very dry subject which is out there, which people are trying to impose upon you. The day you say, I'm a seeker and I'm pursuing IKS such that when I am engaging with this IKS, I am also simultaneously being transformed, then IKS will work for you. So this transformation that Raghava and Seshadri is talking about is a reflexive thing. The transformation happens through the subject, through the knowledge, through the subject. And this is a very, very important aspect that one has to recognize. So we at Indica, we have been progressing over the journey of the last 7 years. And today, our platform has been exploring very, very unique themes. The most important thing is, how do we convert this knowledge into applications? How do we convert this knowledge into packaging? And these themes that we have seen in our conferences that you see, in our online courses, in the second stage, I will share some of the things with you. But the important thing is to think of all these knowledge that you're gaining as a specific theme. And lastly, I want to mention that you have to think of Purushartha Nishchaya. You have to determine what is your goal, and moksha has to be your goal. And IKS has to be a process by which you pursue moksha. And this is a very important thing. And lastly, you have to think from how a journey from an adhyapak to a upadhyaya, to a acharya, to a pandit, to a drishta, to a guru. How does that journey happen? This journey is the most crucial thing. So you have a Purushartha journey, that transformation of inner transformation that has to happen, which is moksha as a goal, and you have to have a person who is giving simple information to knowledge, knowledge to skills, skills to a vision, and then finally to lead them to wisdom. If you do not do this decision of inner transformation, that today I am going to transform like this in the pursuit of moksha, then IKS is not for you. It is going to be a dry subject. It is not going to be of any meaning to you. So transformation and subject to experience and meaning, inner meaning, all these things are packaged in this IKS itself.
Thank you. As always, a grand kaleidoscope that distills so many different things, from the epistemological stance that we need to have, to the temperament that we need to bring when you approach a knowledge subject like Indian knowledge systems, to the grand co-evolution of this journey of how this is simultaneously our Purushartha sadhana, but also as professionals who are going from one level of knowledge to the next level of being able to represent and embody that we teach. I think we get a large meta framework of how to think about IKS and our own journeys. Seshadriji, I would want to throw that back to you. Maybe combine what we've, you mentioned epistemological poverty, and Harigaru mentioned the inner transformation of this subject as the fundamental key. If you could just throw a little bit more light around it, and also make some propositions on how we can go about achieving this.
Thank you, Raghav. So what I have to share now, friends, is divided into two parts. Here is the first part. I am conscious that the audience gathered here are from institutions of higher education. But since I worked with children and I often work with schools, I'm not making the distinction between schools and colleges, because ultimately it's a relationship between a learner and, for lack of a better word, Hariji, when he spoke about Adhyapak, Acharya, up to Guru, I'll just say a pedagogue, which, I hope is an overarching term. I wrote a newspaper piece once, friends, and I said, "Rejoice, it is examination time." Funny, isn't it? No one ever thought of examinations as a joyous experience. There is always a sense of doom, disaster, and finality around it, whereas examination should actually be a celebration of learning. And it is never the case, because to emphasize on a concept that Hariji used, outcome, result, performance is prefaced over process. He used the word process. I have a friend who is the director of a consortium of schools. I said, "Arey yaar, hire a field, ek examination mela kyun nahi karte yaar? Stall laga do. Mathematics stall, geography stall. 2 teachers will be standing in the entrance. As children pass by, throw rose water on them. Open books, convert it into a celebration." So that sort of process of how learning and knowledge is approached actually reminds me of, जैसे हरि जी ने आचार्य से गुरु की बात की, उसी तरह से when he spoke about skills, and I'm reminded of my conceptual guru, Mr. Frank Zappa, the late rock musician, may his soul rest in peace, who says in his autobiography, "Information is not knowledge, knowledge is not wisdom, wisdom is not truth, truth is not love, love is music." But I say to you, love is your willingness to engage with your learner in a culture of conversations and in activity. To cap the first point I'm trying to make, therefore, जब हम विद्या के उद्देश्य की बात करते हैं, the purpose of education, अब आप जो भी कह लें, career, livelihood, numeracy, literacy, all legitimate. I have no argument with these traditional ways of. But if I were to suggest to you that the purpose or the true purpose of education is the development of an egalitarian personhood, the development of a socially conscious and socially responsible citizen, and the development of an identity imbued with aesthetic sensibility of music, of nature, of theater, of dance, of relationships, of feelings, of emotions. So when you look at NEP, therefore, where the focus is not about content in that sense, but about learning how to learn. This idea of learning how to learn, आप चाहे गुरुकुल सिस्टम में जाए या जितने भी ओल्ड सिस्टम्स जो हैं of pedagogy, जहां सीखने की प्रक्रिया, when we speak about क्रिया, प्रक्रिया and प्रतिक्रिया, क्रिया जो जोग है, जो योग है, effort, प्रक्रिया which is the process, and pratikriya which is response systems around which the way we act out life is based. तो जब हम लाइफ स्किल्स की बात करते हैं, जीवन कौशल्य, डिसीजन मेकिंग, प्रॉब्लम सॉल्विंग, communication, interpersonal relationship, empathy, coping with stress, each of these skills operate in a certain context. Decision making in a career context, decision making in a relationship conflict, decision making in peer pressure, and in a given context more than one skill operates. Now, how do you close the triangulation between life skills and the context? It is through pedagogy and through experiential rather than didactic pedagogy. कोई भी किताब पढ़ के मोटरसाइकिल या गाड़ी नहीं चला सकता है, या मोटरसाइकिल रिपेयर नहीं, you have to do it. ये क्रिया और प्रक्रिया पे आधारित है. It is based on the whole investment in activity and in processes. Then let me come to the second point, because when we look at the pandemic and NEP 2020, and if you look at the sophists, from the time of Socrates, who really thought vertically, what has happened during the pandemic is intolerance of uncertainty. So the sophists, started with certainty and built their case upon it. But Socrates, thought horizontally, starting with uncertainty and gradually kind of whittling it down to possible ideas to arrive at the truth. So there is a vast landscape of ideas out there, and it's our responsibility to unearth the falsehoods and discard them. Now, Russell, on the other hand, said that the value of philosophy lies in its uncertainty. So if you look at the whole practice of probability, statistics, modeling of all kinds, now this approach is Aristotelian. Truth exists, we can know it, but not always. Uncertainty is in our minds, not in objects, and only sometimes can we measure it. And there are good and bad ways of doing it. But look at the wisdom of uncertainty. जहां हम कहते हैं, Dharma's true home is neither here nor there. The Buddha's search for enlightenment began when he left home. Now, friends, modern people travel so easily. We may not appreciate the weight of this decision in his time in 6th century BC, when most people never ventured farther than a few miles from their birthplace. Because liminality goes against the grain. The more uncertain our lives become in response to events beyond our control, the more we want to plant our feet solidly in one place. तो इस प्रश्न को सरल तरीके से मैं किसी से भी पूछूं, भैया, how far into the future have you worked out stuff? तो कोई कहेगा, I have finished my masters, I'm going to take a gap year and then I will see. Or somebody may say that, I have some seed money for a startup, so I've got things figured out, for 10 years. If you ask this question to a stockbroker, he'll say 2 minutes here. My world will come crashing down if I make a bad decision. Therefore, the the comfort that methodology and pedagogical systems of IKS give us in terms of its deep foundations of the Kriya, Prakriya, Pratikriya paradigm, of this depth of engagement and of being conscious in terms of one's citizenry, can be summarized thus, and I will end with that in this part. Empathy plays an important role in being a socially competent person with meaningful social relationships. So the ability to empathize is important for promoting positive behaviors towards others and facilitating social interactions and relationships, thus motivating empathic, altruistic, helpful behaviors. But this skill also makes us challenge intolerance, challenge bias, and challenge stereotyping when we see it. So it is the ability to emotionally understand what other people feel, see things from their point of view and context, imagine ourselves in their place and respond appropriately. तो किसी ने क्या खूब कहा है, lack of empathy is perhaps as much a lack of imagination as a lack of feeling. And preoccupied, as we understandably are with our own lives, it is not surprising that we fail to imagine the lives of the vulnerable, the marginalized. So the competencies that are required to imagine and respond is what IKS is about. कल्पना, काल्पनिक क्षमताएं, कल्पना करने का सामर्थ्य जो है, none of our modern pedagogies really look at. So the education system, unfortunately, is competition driven. It is not comparison driven. यार नीट एग्जाम देना है, वो JEE देना है, मिला कि नहीं मिला, and you know this, you get caught up in this whole web, therefore, of this very restrictive, patterns of thinking there. And this is where I feel the NEP is a very complex document. But if you navigate through it, I think it has given us the platform and the context to very strategically make the kind of transformation that Hariji referred to in his opening comment, transforming ourselves from, and I say this with all respect, so when I use the word mere adhyapak, this is not to trivialize the fantastic work that you're doing, my friends out there. तो ये transformation जो है कि जैसे somebody comes to, like this 37-year-old techie who comes back to school at the age of 37 to his teacher who's on the verge of retirement and says, "Teacher, do you remember me?" No, child, I don't. Teacher, but I've never forgotten you. I don't know whether you remember, very horrible family situation, and truth be told, I'm not reconciled with my family. I don't know what it is that you saw on my face one day. You did me the dignity of calling me aside very quietly to say, "Child, you look a little out of sorts, but ek gumsum lag rahe ho, kya baat hai?" And I told you what had happened. And it is not that you did something very great, but you said it must have been so difficult to keep this burden within your heart. I'm happy you shared it with me. And if there's anything I can possibly do, please don't hesitate. I'll be happy to assist you. Teacher, I have never ever forgotten that act of kindness. 25 saal ke baad. That's the kind of character that you become in the emerging narrative of the learner with whom you're in a relationship. ये IKS सिखाता है. बाकी सब तो यार, teaching is a damn job. A job is what gets you money. A vocation is who you are. तो ये भी transformation जो हरिजी ने जो जिक्र किया, ये two parallel tracks जो हैं, अध्यापक से गुरु तक, और क्षमता से एक तरह से जो निर्वाणा की तरफ या मोक्ष ही कह लीजिए, ये दो ट्रैक्स जो हैं, and one is very realistic, day-to-day oriented, the other is ideological, It is in terms of our thinking processes. अब देखिए इसका सुंदर मिश्रण जो है ये दो ट्रैक्स का, ये दो पटरियां जो है, what a magnificent two-track this and a robust track this is, therefore, to look at how methodology and pedagogy, therefore, of this, the classroom as a collaborative community where we co-construct knowledge, in the words of Vygotsky, that outcomes are both planned for and emergent. And the classroom becomes a collaborative community where we jointly construct knowledge.
Thank you. I think we're getting that grand possibility when we talk about IKS. Shekharji has taken that out of the classroom and situated that in life itself. And if you combine that with what Hariji mentioned about the transcendental principle, that has to be always the guiding force, the idea of mukti, the idea of liberation, which is also the idea of education in the Indian knowledge system context. I am reminded of a story. I just read this last night. A friend posted this. This question of, बहुत बड़ा लगता है ना, when you talk about mukti, liberation. So somebody asked Ramana Maharshi. So, this is fine. We understand that at some point we have to think about this. But on a day-to-day basis, we have a million other things to do. How do we track both these things simultaneously? Also the two tracks that Hariji is talking about. So Ramana Maharshi ji always contemplated, silent. And then he said, when did you start? He came to the ashram that day, the devotee. Then I started early morning. He said, how did you come? Said, I took a train. Did you eat? Yes, I got down, I had breakfast, and I just got back into the train and I came here. So since morning, you knew you had to reach the ashram. But to reach the ashram, you had to do several other things. Did at any point in time of getting into the train, of having breakfast, of reading your newspaper, did you lose sight of the destination that you have to reach, which is the ashram? It was very clear that the ashram was the destination and everything else that I'm doing. And this is, we are all having daily realities. We can speak here in a setup like a faculty development program about the big possibilities, but reality intrudes. So when we talk about challenges, as I move from the big possibility into the challenge, into the learning culture, I would want us to remember the metaphor of reaching the ashram, reaching the destination, that everything else that you do, from booking the ticket to packing your bag to getting onto the train and having your breakfast, all of that is necessary. All of that is the path of transformation, but the transformation happens towards that destination. So I want to go back to Harigaru with that idea that there is the big possibility that we've established so far about transformation, about meaning making. And you've been obviously advocating this for a long time. What are some of the challenges and what can be a design to address those challenges?
The challenges are, at one level, IKS today, there is a sort of a revival with the dynamism that the government, the current dispensation, a bit late in their tenure, but they're showing an extraordinary dynamism in the last 3 years, especially after NEP has come. And you see now they've announced 25 centers, there are 10 centers already. So there is a flurry of activity on IKS. But the challenge really is, as long as IKS is a separate department, it is other. So this othering of IKS has to go. IKS and WKS, that is a Western knowledge system, have to be bridged. And the focus now has to shift in integrating knowledge civilizationally, linearly, based on chronology of time. Till such time that is not done, IKS mainstreaming would be very, very difficult. There is, as it is, hostility in the current environment. There is all these issues. And all of you have made this effort to come and spend time. But still, as long as it's a separate department and not a part of the DNA. Right now, education can be considered like we are focused on voluntary education. What you are focused on is career-oriented education. So IKS has to be embedded in career-oriented education, not as a separate department wherein it's an optionality. So this is the first challenge, and therefore, now that so many IKS centers have come, the ministry has to take a view on how fast, because the Western world is not going to integrate. We only have to make an effort to integrate IKS and the current knowledge system. I won't call it WKS, but the current knowledge system. This is the first challenge. The second challenge is that, again, I go back to the transformation part of it, is that IKS has to be not thought of scale. It has to be thought of as a Guru Sishya Parampara. It cannot be in a situation where there's a classroom and there are 100 students and you're teaching Vedic mathematics. That's just it has to be thought of and taught in a manner that we revive the pedagogy of the Guru Sishya Parampara. And this is a very, very important aspect and an important challenge for which there is no immediate solution. It's not that there is going to be multiple, Gurukulams that are going to be formulated. In fact, one of the things that I will speak at the end is that to all the faculty of this year and the last 2 years, Indica is proposing an immersive retreat to people who are interested, wherein this whole Guru Sishya Parampara is taught. Today you have attended in IIT Kharagpur, you have attended in the classroom a particular methodology. But we need to take it into a Guru Sishya Parampara. We need to take it to the immersive manner. That is to say, you have to get up in the morning at 4 o'clock, you have to do your yogasana, you have to do your pradhana, you have to sit with the Guru. The Guru will have a satsang of that subject. Then there is a karma yoga. Then in the evening there is this thing. So this kind of a Gurukulam format has to be brought in if you want IKS to have the impact that is there. So these are the two challenges that I see, and it will take some time for this kind of a thing to happen, both the bridging and the Guru Sishya Parampara.
I'll make a quick comment on the idea of scale as somebody who had an enterprise running on, reinventing some of those principles as mentorship, as how you create the learning space for that, and how it has to contend with this demand for scale. And I had a certain way of looking at scale. Unfortunately, I think it goes back to the epistemology that Shekharji was talking to us and pointing to us specifically, that we've come to respect and almost deify quantification. And our idea of scale, when Hariji is also talking about, is the idea of 5,000 students, 10,000 scholars, 100 centers. What can scale is the impact through idea and through thought. For the next 10 years, what we need to do is generate that system design that Hariji is talking about. That learning space, a culture of learning where behaviors can be observed, taught, learned, internalized and embodied. And then when the refinement happens, even a single teacher with that refinement, this is how the education was in Bharat. If you look at why do we remember Swami Vivekananda 150 years? Why is that such a power of energy that just awakens every single force that comes into contact with it? Why is that? That was not scale in terms of numbers. You cannot have that kind of scale. But the scale comes in terms of impact through content, impact through contact. So I think there is an opportunity, and going back to the criticality of imagination. Imagination is much, much bigger, much more rarer, and much more important than talent. And if we are able to imagine in our mind's eye that the scale about IKS, especially in academic leadership and academia, that this is not necessarily about the unit economics of having 5,000 students. It is about the idea scaling. Once IKS becomes the fundamental epistemology through which every other subject is taught, once IKS becomes the way in which human worth is understood even by the industry, that is scale. All you need is, 1 or 2 batches of extraordinary people who come through this system with the rigor, and whatever they do will become high impact. And that is scale. So I think there is an opportunity to reimagine scale through a culture of learning. And Shekharji, you alluded to that briefly. It'd be great if you can expand on the culture of learning, particularly learning as a process of socialization. where behaviors are observed, mimicked, internalized, and what are the kind of learning spaces and what is the imagination for such kind of socialization?
I would like to respond to that, building on some points that both you, Raghav and Hariji had made about the framework and space in which this learning should take place. And, you use the phrase taking it out of the classroom. तो किसी ने क्या खूब कहा है, Chapnaro, why should a textbook be a book? Why should a classroom be a room? And why should a school building be a building? But on the other hand, on the subject of books itself, I'm not a very social media person, but my team recently persuaded me to be on social media. So this is my latest post. On the other hand, someone says, "Nice library. Is one of these a trick book? How so? Like you pull it off the shelf and a hidden door opens? Oh yeah, all of them. दिमाग की बत्ती जला दो, हर दरवाजे खोल दो." So the notion of doors and how they open. तो जब हम learning की बात करते हैं, let's and since Richa introduced this as a workshop, let's get this in a workshop, kind of a format. Let's say I wish to speak about the theme of courage to a group of learners. Then, now there are two ways to do it. The didactic way, of course, is to say that I want to introduce a very important construct to you, and that construct is one of courage. And courage is very important to have in the face of adversity, or when you have to take a stand, against the mainstream, or you're faced with a predicament. Mahatma Gandhi was courageous. Nelson Mandela was courageous. I would extol the virtue of courage to all of you. I hope you have understood. And and people may say yes, no, maybe, or we don't know what this person is talking about. But supposing you were to convert the whole thing to say that I want to speak to you about a very important construct. But before I do that, I'm going to name you some slogans, and I want you to name the product. Okay, friends? And you can say it out loud in the audience. I'm going to name the slogan, you name the product. Just do it. Nike. Connecting people. Nokia. And so on. And then I proceed in the session to say, have you heard of something called USP, Unique Selling Proposition? So for a slogan to be a unique selling proposition for a particular product, what should be the nature of that slogan? Friends, you can yell out, the slogan should be catchy,
innovative, inspiring,
relatable, pithy, and so on and so forth. Excellent. Now I'm going to name you a product, and I want you to come up with a slogan in order to sell it. The name of the product is courage. So let's come up with slogans. So
let's have it.
Courage, let's have it.
From Dr. Giridhar.
They're excellent. So we did a game, which was a slogan, name the product game, and then we did a listing exercise on USP, and then we say, okay, now let's speak about situations. Let's do a listing of situations in which we actually have to manifest courage. So people do a listing that if someone is drowning in a lake and I have to save him, but I don't know swimming that well. If I have to stand up to my parents to say that I'm in love with this person and I wish to marry him or her, or if I have flunked in an exam and I don't know how to say it or if I've been caught doing something which I ought not to have been doing, and I need to face the repercussions. So there are the whole lot of listings, and then we say let's select one that. So there is you, and you're in love with such and such a person, and you're facing this entire extended family. Your dad, your mom, your aunt, the nosy neighbor, the patriarch of the family, and the local sarpanch who they've called to say, ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಹೇಳಿ ಇವನಿಗೆ इसको बात कीजिए इससे చూడండి ఏం చేస్తాం so and then they act it out. So the role of theater, of enactment, Vygotsky calls it as the zone of proximal development. The only true moment for me, friends, is when my child client is sitting in front of me. All the rest is an approximation and an appropriation of the truth. तो सत्य की परिभाषा जो है, सत्य क्या है? I'm reminded of Kurosawa's film Rashomon. There is a guy, there is his gal, there's a bandit, he accosts them, he molests the girl, there's a fight, the guy gets killed, she commits suicide, he also dies, there's an eyewitness, and all four are giving their accounts. All four accounts are completely true, and all four accounts are completely different. So, the use of enactment, the use of real life stories, the use of film, the use of texts, the use of experience, of stories, to really build a learning culture where you're not dependent on regurgitated knowledge, but you're constantly looking at things in a way where ultimately you come down to what I often say. The mistake that people make when they go to Agra is they go in the morning and come back in the evening. You can't do justice to Agra because there is Taj, there is Fatehpur Sikri, there is the Agra Fort. You should go there for a week so that when you come back, you can say, Taj ko दूर से देखा, पास से देखा, बाहर से देखा, अंदर से देखा, आगे से देखा, पीछे से देखा, धूप में देखा, बारिश में देखा, जब संगमरमर का रंग बदलता है, और दिन में देखा और रात में देखा, कौन सी रात में? वो पूर्णिमा की रात जो है, and yesterday you would know was the last full moon of 2022, and so that's how when you get your learners to look at an issue, just as a child looks at an object, उसको टटोलेगा, उसको हिलाएगा, उसको चाट के देखेगा, to be able to say, look at Taj from far, from near, from front, from the back, from outside, from inside, in sunlight, in rain when the color of the marble changes, and in daytime on a full moon night, when it brightly shines there. To be able to, so that's what learning is. And that intensity of, Hari ji ne jo baat kahi na, us शब्द को नोट कीजिए, immersion, अपने आप को एक संकल्पना में डुबोना, immerse yourself in a concept. And when Raghav spoke about idea escalation, एक idea को multiply karna, that the focus is on an idea expansion. So idea and immersion, एक संकल्पना में, एक concept में अपने आप को डुबोना, डुबकी मारना पूरी तरह से, get it all over you, and feel it, and where all it really works. And that's where the point that Hari ji made ultimately, application. तो हम जब life skills की बात कर रहे थे, in which context does it apply in our day-to-day lives? That जो भी knowledge है, knowledge system, ultimately its utility is in application. And that's where, not that, Manan Chintan and meditation, there's anything wrong with it. But one of the things that, I had mentioned to Richa many years ago, is that, when we engage in contemplative studies, that is fine. But ultimately, if it is not engaged in reaching out to vulnerable, marginalized, and this is what the pandemic has taught us. Pandemics of the nature of COVID have a disproportionate impact on the more vulnerable, the daily wage workers, the migrant workers. Our failure to imagine what the lives of the other is. हरि जी ने जब othering की बात की थी ना IKS को लेके, तो ये populations होती हैं, can we even imagine what their lives are like? The transgendered person in the traffic light, the girl who's been trafficked with complicity of her family for sex work from Andhra Pradesh to Kamatipura and Mumbai. कैसी होती होगी उनकी जिंदगी? Our failure to imagine. And it is in that imagination and that immersion that really the transformation of ideas into application really takes place. And then you get into to action mode, to activist mode. So that's the kind of framework, Raghav, that I wanted to mention in response to the invitation.
And without attempting to comment on that, because that will dilute the emotion that I can feel in this room right now, I want to take that to Harigaru about the spaces and what are the constituent elements of a space like that, if we have to create a culture of learning.
Yeah, this is what we are actually working on, Raghava. Trying to do two things actually, and establish a Mahagurukulam, a Mahagurukulam, a Gurukulam like Takshashila and Nalanda. We call them as universities. They didn't call them as universities. They were Gurukulams. But they were multidisciplinary Gurukulam. So within the premises, you had multiple disciplines being taught. Our goal and vision is to build a multidisciplinary Gurukulam. We have purchased the land outskirts of Hyderabad. We have bought about 70 acres of land. And our idea is to have multiple Gurukulams as one layer. A Gurukulam for Ayurveda, Gurukulam for Yoga, Gurukulam for Vedanta, Gurukulam for like Kalakshetra for arts, a Gurukulam for Kalaripattu, Gurukulam for a Veda Pathshala, a Gurukulam for these kind of multiple disciplines that we can have. And at the very center, I'm not sure how many of you are aware, we have a concept called inter-university center. A center which liaises with multiple universities, but it's a research center. So our idea is to establish a inter-university center for Indic knowledge systems that is encapsulated around multiple Gurukulams in multiple disciplines, and then have another layer of multiple institutions, an ecosystem, like an institutional area in Delhi, like IIT is there, so many institutions are there. Like that, have multiple institutions around us. So you're building a physical ecosystem of multiple institutions. And then you have a community of people living, like an Auroville kind of a thing, like you have a community of people. So you have at the core, the navel is a research center, then you have multiple Gurukulams, then you have multiple institutions, and then you have a community. This is the vision that we want, wherein the academic from any university around the world does not write or deal with IKS as unless it's a lived experience. And so he comes there, he or she stays in the campus and does research but every day he's engaging with the traditional pedagogy that happens, in a traditional Gurukulam that happens. So what happens is the bridge between the two civilizational pedagogies happens, and therefore both the systems learn from each other and feed onto each other. So this is the kind of a space that we are imagining. Of course, several challenges are there because for the research center, we want to take a permission, but there is no such scope in the UGC Act for a private to get an inter-university center permission. We don't want to be a university. We don't want scale, and we don't want thousands of students. We want to be limited, focus on limited number of scholars, postdocs, PhDs, masters, and train them in the traditional way in the same proximity. So that's what we want to do. And the other thing is to think of pop-up Gurukulams. So one of the things that we are going to reach out to all of you is to do a pop-up Gurukulam. That means take a retreat or take anywhere in India, and all of you will be invited. There'll be traditional scholars, there'll be scholars, and we will give you a immersive experience, a transformative learning experience in that retreat environment. So this we can get scale. Right now, in fact, we are doing a number of retreats. We have a facility in Bangalore. We have done, for the first time, we have done 6, Raghava, you also attended, we have done 6 weekends with wisdoms, with normal scholars. Normal scholars means not the traditional scholars. Michelle was there, Shrikant was there, then Meenakshi ji was there. So we had Vinod Vidvans, we had several normal scholars, but we said, okay, come for 3 days and spend. There's no agenda. You just sit at the feet of the Guru, and the Guru will teach at his own convenience when he wants to do it in 4 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock in the night. But we want to replicate this. So this can be done. We can get a sort of scale in that sense. So we are having this Mahagurukulam and then pop-up Gurukulams. This is how we want to create this immersive learning experiences.
Hello, sir. This is Yash. I am an architect and right now doing my master's in urban planning from architecture department. So my question was, how ready are we for IKS? Now, this has got 2 aspects. One is the acceptance level of readiness, and the other is how we are imparting the knowledge. The 2 ways to look at it. And this further has got 2 parts. The softer aspect of IKS, where we talk about how to bring a child about into the system of IKS, and the other is the hard knowledge that we are going to give them. So this question is originating from the fact that when I talk about IKS related implementation in my own thesis, I get questions like, you are talking everything in air, and this is not how it happens. Have we taught you anything, and things like that? So my question is, how ready are we?
See, when we call something a system, and particularly in the realm of knowledge, and hopefully that has come through not just in the last 1 hour, but also over the last 14 days, is that there are 4 things that is a compact. One, that there is a truth claim. There is a truth claim when Hariji talks about transformation about the individual, when we talk about subjective inquiry, when we talk about transformation, that this is a truth claim. That when you transform yourself, you develop a higher way of seeing. That is a truth claim in the Indian knowledge system. And there is a whole attendant body of knowledge. But to establish the truth claim, you need a validated means of knowing, which is the challenge that you're pointing to. That the epistemology that is used to establish what is truth today has a slightly different connotation, a different method, a different way of approach than what would be suited for Indian knowledge systems. That does not mean that IKS does not have its own epistemology. It just means that that has not been sufficiently understood or imbibed in the system of education that we have today, which is where the NEP comes into picture. That, like Shekharji said, it creates an air cover. It creates an opportunity for us to imagine and show what that epistemology is. It already is there. Right? Then there is the question, and I think that once again was evocatively pointed by Shekharji, about the moral imagination, the socialization process, the purpose of knowledge and work itself, which is the axiology. What is the value system that guides or informs any research? If you're a PhD student, where is the question of ethics? And I'm going to talk about the crisis of ethics in the afternoon session. And then the fourth one is praxis, which is what Hariji is talking about. That unless you have a way of embodying it, if that system of knowledge is based on embodiment, unless you have a space where you can experience it, which is anubhuti as epistemology, you cannot actually talk about it authentically. There is this challenge, but it is not not just theoretical, but I've seen PhD thesis coming from all over the world now. In fact, there is an absolutely brilliant one on Natya Shastra, which was entirely based on the Indian epistemology. I'd like to share that with you. I think it's coming out as a book soon. So we will have to exercise our imagination. For those, see, you are a pioneer. Somebody like you who is looking to do a PhD in architecture using Indian knowledge system pedagogy at IIT, trying to synthesize the methods that you're being taught versus the methods that you think you want to follow. It is a pioneering work. It is a work of imagination, which means you will have to understand these principles. You also have to study our knowledge system and do the synthesis and say, you should be in a position to say, when you talk about this principle, this is the corresponding idea in IKS. That is a work of research as well. So it is harder, but it's not impossible. In fact, I've seen this being completed. Harigaru, any comments, and then I'll go to you.
Yeah. No, actually, I'm very happy with the person who is asking and the question itself. Because we have on our online courses platform, we have conducted a course, online course on Vastu. So that's the first application of our Indian knowledge system to the field that you are in. And I want to just tell you that Maharshi Mahesh Yogi has established a university in Ohio, I think, in the US, where all the faculty live in a Vastu compliant 200-acre campus. Very interesting. I just spoke to one. So they actually, all the houses in that campus have been built on the basis of Vastu. But there are three angles that you have to think about and how I can think. First and foremost, when we talk about IKS, you all have to become multidisciplinary thinkers, and therefore we will discuss about that separately. But specifically to your question, there are three aspects of the IKS part that you can straight away learn from. One is from the aesthetic side, from understanding what is beauty, and how does the consumer respond? How does the whole thing about aesthetics, the design and aesthetics part? The second is the Vastu element. The third is the sustainability aspect. Today, the greatest contribution, if you look at what is the contribution of Sanatana Dharma and all our indigenous knowledge system, one of the key areas is the sustainability. Our agriculture practice, our construction practices, all are focused on sustainability. When the world around is moving towards sustainable constructions, there's a lot of lessons from our own tradition that we can transplant to the contemporary things. So there are three aspects that I can readily think of in the question that you're asking.
Thank you.
Yeah, my response specifically comes from the fact that the gentleman who put the question comes from the background of architecture. I would very briefly like to locate myself for you. I do not come from any particular religious belief or persuasion. I'm not exactly a believer. If you force me, I may perhaps say I'm a Hindu agnostic, but only if you force me. Not so much about forts and ramparts and palaces and mausoleums, but I'm exceedingly fond of ancient places of worship, particularly where their architecture is concerned. And when Raghav spoke about truth, these are existing truths. These are not structures that exist in our imagination. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The Juma Masjid in Srinagar, built in pagoda, Persian and pagoda style, it's not a traditional structure, beautifully symmetrical with almost 300 plus deodar trees of 25 to 36 feet in height. 1394. Brihadeshwara temple in Tanjavur, to build the Gopuram, if you do a calculation, your ramp has had to be at least 6 kilometers in length. The Bhojpur temple near Bhopal, with one of the largest shivlings carved out of a single stone. Hampi, the Hazara Ram temple, musical pillars. Konark, explicitly sexual in its construction. We were an evolved and an emancipated race. No machines, no virtual designs, no cranes. How on earth did they build it? Ajanta, carving from top down in a single piece of rock in the most exquisite kind of. So when we speak of architecture and we look at design and architecture, there is a knowledge system there which is mind-boggling. Considering that we existed at a time, like I said, no machinery, no net, no computer, no equipment, no cranes. So, as a student of architecture, if you really look at Indian knowledge systems, these are existing truths. They are there in stone and mortar. For us to really learn and conceive and imagine what kind of process they would have used to actually build structures of this nature. So this is what I wanted to say by way of response of how we can relate architecture. So Hari ji ne aesthetics और वास्तु और sustainability की बात की. How some of these structures have still retained their robustness. They didn't have the kind of equipment and the substances that we use, cyclone-resistant material and stuff like that. Sigiriya in Sri Lanka, the most well-designed system of water and irrigation. सोच देखिए इनकी दूरदृष्टि जो थी. And we are talking about 1,000-2,000 years ago that this was conceptualized. And this is what we have to retrieve. And this is my proposition.
Namaskar. I'm Sweetie Sabo, faculty with the Art of Living. And I'm really grateful to have been a part of this conversation and discussion. As Shekhar sir had pointed out that not people who are able to think and have the capability and afford to think about IKS, but there is a part of population who can't afford to think about IKS right now. And they have been the most affected people during the last few years. How do we go about to turn the knowledge of IKS and bring it to them, bring it to their notice, or how can we bring, because they are part of the population and they deserve to have this knowledge?
This has been a question I've grappled with as well. Right? And as you think about this more, trying to synthesize your natural moral imagination with also an understanding of what is required at a civilizational level, the things that you need to protect to even make this imagination possible, you also realize that you are not teaching them. That is why the definition of IKS, it is not just a scholarly one. There is a scholarly part to it, which is the traditional thought, which is the Shastric knowledge. But IKS is also fundamentally the wisdom, the knowledge, the embodied learning that has come to us from all of the communities. It is actually in their craft. It is in the daily work that they do that knowledge was produced. It was not India's knowledge systems was not, not just about some philosophical exegesis. It was not intellectual speculation. It absolutely encapsulates your pottery making, your Vastu Shastra. It actually, is all about the communities which have developed this. So when we talk about how do we make them a part, I think we need to figure out what are the systems that have separated them from being producers of knowledge in their own habitat. So it's a question of habitat. And then, of course, the genius of the Indian civilization, in my understanding, is that it was able to synthesize this theorization at a meta level with the knowledge that comes from everyday practice. And this beautiful, natural, organic dialogue between systems of codification and systems of generation, which was all infused into a culture. It was not even something, think about Ayurveda, for example. You will find Ayurveda practically in every kitchen in Bharat. It's not a theorization. It is something that was part of the culture. Think about festivals. The festivals, when you think about, my colleague Pankaj talks about it, when you think about the idea of a Utsava, on 364 days, you will have to go to the god and you will get a darshan based on, whatever the time and culture is. But one day in a year, the god comes out to the last person in the village. That was established for the same purpose. It is the same empathy that we are talking about today. That the god goes to every single person out there in the village so that they don't need to go there. That is again the same kind of design. So this design, this thinking is part of our cultural DNA. We need to, the first thing to be done when we talk about how do we make it accessible to them is actually we should invert our own position as learners and really understand what is this Purushartha based structure of Bharatiya Samajis. And the more you understand it, we actually go through a transformation ourselves and we say that we don't need to actually teach them or we don't need to make it accessible. We just need to become a facilitator for some of the things that might be lost. And in the process, we are the ones who are going to be benefited. I'll leave there and then I'll ask Shekhar-ji to.
It's an interesting question. In fact, when you spoke about pottery and so on, I wanted to add food. This question is a concerning and vexing question because it has come up, very often, particularly when we speak about vulnerable and marginalized populations. Sometimes, people confuse Indian knowledge systems with some only with meditative, yogic, contemplative practices. To say, they are dealing, with a, kind of reality. It's like the question that people raised when the genocide in Rwanda took place between the Hutu and the Tutsi tribes. And someone asked, where was God when Rwanda happened? And so people sometimes express skepticism to say that they are dealing with the struggles of day-to-day life. So won't all this sort of stuff be somewhat disrespectful and perhaps self-indulgent on the part of those who are actually propagating these kind of practices? But this is the problem. IKS is not, about. It's not about japa and mantra and prayer. That may be one part, perhaps minuscule, in the larger scheme of what IKS means. And I think, given the kind of inequity that exists in society, becoming increasingly obvious as we go along, IKS has a lot to offer in terms of how we live our lives. So it is about routine and practices. It's about living and livelihood and how these are embedded in the cultures that constitute the regions of these countries, the languages, the tribes, their food habits, their customs of child rearing, their practices, their idea of preservation, of austerity, and so on. So that's the way that I would look at a balance in a situation of the kind of ambiguity that the person who raised the question, Sweetie Sabu, raised. Hari?
Yeah. The way we think about IKS knowledge is intellectual, cultural, and spiritual. That's one way of approaching it. The other way we approach it is from a textual heritage, a textual knowledge, embodied knowledge, and then experiential knowledge. So we look at knowledge itself into three buckets. So a thought from one part of it actually flows through the entire thing. So the intellectual flows through the cultural and spiritual, and the textual heritage, textual knowledge goes into embodied knowledge to experiential knowledge. And the examples that Raghava has quoted are very valid. So we in fact have established a center for embodied knowledge. And basically the focus is on the indigenous, like all the crafts, all the arts, all the practices which don't have a textual backing, but have our thought coming through and being practiced. So that's the way we think about this.
Namaste. I am Dhatri. I am from the physics department, third year undergraduate in IIT Kharagpur. So my question is related to how we talked about IKS has to be embedded in a career-oriented education, which is actually the need because for a youth population today who wants to secure financial security and who thinks that that is the true happiness, I mean monetary security, and people wanting to go to IT even if they are interested in something like physics or chemistry. How would we address those youth? And my question is specifically to Harigaru here, that the Gurukul system that is going to be established in the Indica, how is that going to be connected to career-oriented education for the youth?
Yeah.
Quick comment and then Harigaru, on the first part of your question. Again, something that as somebody who is taking the responsibility of talking about IKS in public fora, it's important that we, and I've mentioned this, right? Our responsibility is to think from your perspective, not from our perspective of sitting here 40 years, 50 years and thinking that, okay, IKS sounds great. Because that is, we are just ruminating about the mistakes that we've done and pontificating that, we could have done better if we knew better. But this is actually, Dhatri, the way to think about this is ultimately all knowledge is a preparation of the mind. Right? Indian knowledge systems and the exceptionality of the claim to exceptionality of the Indian knowledge systems, in my understanding, is that it has the best method to prepare the mind. And once the mind is sufficiently curated, the multidisciplinary mind that we are talking about, then whatever it looks at, it is able to, in that moment of ekagrata, where the subject and object becomes one, you are able to channelize all of your resources, your memory, your will, your attention, all of these things you project to that object and you actually become one with that object. It's not a stimulus response anymore. It is a simultaneous conjoining of the subject and the object. And that knowledge is what we call embodied. And when you do that in any discipline, that is why IKS has to be thought of as the fundamental. It is the foundation. And then on that, whether you apply that in sciences, in arts, in architecture, you actually, the more you get into IKS, you will see the unity of knowledge principle. What Edward Wilson called consilience, the unity of knowledge, and he was lampooned in the Western academia for that. He had to face physical assaults. But in Indian knowledge systems, this was never the case. This is because we have actually evolved into this university structure where you have arts, engineering, everything else is different. So IKS is not that. IKS is actually that integrated, integral learning culture. Once you think about it, then the career question also is very simple, because if you are a better mind, then you are likely to have a better career, because you'll also handle yourself better. Not just about getting into the job, but it is also being successful. Because life, and I would request you to go through this valedictory speech if you haven't seen, by David Foster Wallace. Adult life is tough. You have to deal with vast amounts of time and boredom. And what we decide, and liberal arts education he talks about, the challenge with liberal arts education and critical thinking today, he points out in the Western academia, is that it is not about how to think alone. It does not answer the question, what is worth thinking about? And how do you know yourself at that moment of thinking? These are the tools that Indian knowledge system provides you.
No, I think we don't have much time, but I just want to respond that there are two ways of thinking about IKS. And one is that we were so great in the past, and that's fine. That's fine. So we are very great. We pat ourselves in the back, and that was fine. We invented everything, right? That's a question for your identity, that you want to feel good that you come from a civilization. That's one part. But largely when we think about IKS today, and what we at Indica are thinking is, what is it, how is it relevant to us today? What are the aspects of IKS that are still timeless? So one is a contextual time knowledge, one is timeless. We have identified 5 areas. Fundamentally, we have to become transdisciplinary thinkers, which is basically where we can navigate the VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. The VUCA world can only be navigated by transdisciplinary thinkers. But sustainability, aesthetics, well-being, peace and happiness, and pluralism. These are the 5 domains that are timeless, for which Indian knowledge system has solutions to the world. So therefore, the desire from the market forces will come and say, we want people who are trained in these 5 things and who are transdisciplinary thinkers. The market will want people like us. So automatically then the student itself will say, okay, I want to do IKS because the market wants such people. And that will happen. It will happen in 10 years, 20 years, but we have just started the journey. But definitely it happens because this knowledge itself is priceless. It's timeless. So you can be sure that in 20 years' time, the world would want, as it is we are seeing, why are so many dharmics being the CEOs of the worldwide organizations? Why are dharmics becoming the prime ministers? There's a DNA of pluralism. There's a DNA of the perspective. The ethical DNA is there very much in our culture. That translates. So you will see a lot of such things happening, wherein there will be analysis and research of understanding our DNA. Where is this culture of empathy? Where is this culture of pluralism coming from? It comes from our heritage.
Thank you so much. We've spoken about transformation, meaning making, the subjective inquiry, and the learning culture. Hopefully that has given us some fodder, and we'll continue this dialogue through the workshops that Hariji is talking about.